are very unique. Men's brains are made up of little boxes. And we have a box for everything. We've got a box for the car. We've got a box for the money. We've got a box for the job. We've got a box for you. We've got a box for the kids. We've got a box for your mother somewhere in the basement. We got boxes everywhere. And the rule is the boxes don't touch. When a man discusses a particular subject, we go to that particular box, we pull that box out, we open the box, we discuss only what is in that box, all right? And then we close the box and put it away, being very, very careful not to touch any other boxes. Now, women's brains are very, very different from men's brains. Women's brains are made up of a big ball of wire. And everything is connected to everything. The money's connected to the car, and the car's connected to your job, and your kids are connected to your mother, and everything's connected to everything. And it's just like... Now, men, we have a box in our brain that most women are not aware of. This particular box has nothing in it. It's true. It's true. In fact, we call it the nothing box. And of all the boxes a man has in his brain, the nothing box is our favorite box. If a man has a chance, he'll go to his nothing box every time.
Isn't that the truth? Sometimes my wife will say, "What are you thinking about?" And I'll say, "Nothing." And I'm not. I can just go, "Yeet." There is nothing more frustrating to a woman than a man. And there is nothing more frustrating to a man than a woman. I had a few of them. You scaredy cats. My wife's not here. I can say what I want. She's gone out of town. But I'll tell you what, marriage, and we're doing Marriage Matters, and we've been talking about marriage. Marriage is the most wonderful relationship that we have, and marriage can be the most frustrating relationship that we have because two opposites are permanently, lifelong attached, and no longer can you live independently, but you are interrelated to one another. And your expectations of what that other person should do, that you shouldn't have to tell them, doesn't happen. And all the ideals that we had about what married life was going to be like once we got married are pretty much dashed in the first 6 months, and the rest of our life is trying to pick up the pieces and live together. And we've been looking at this whole idea of making marriage work, looking at some things that look, and we found out all the way back to the beginning that God said it's not good for a man to be alone, but God brought a woman into his life, and it is always good when God brings the right person into your life. And God brought the right person into Adam's life, and they were married, and they stuck together. We also found out, we're in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, by the way, if you want to turn there. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, the Apostle Paul talks about some of the benefits, but what he talks about is he talks about the oneness of marriage. There is an emotional oneness, there is a spiritual oneness, and there is a physical oneness that happens within marriage. And then we've kind of been going along here, but what I want to talk about today is I really want to deal with this whole idea about being content. Being content in the marital status that we are in. Because here's the problem that they had back in those days. Back in those days is the same as here. Single people wishing they were married. Married people frustrated with the partner that they have. Not that they would want to be single again, but just so frustrated. Life was so much simpler when I was all by myself and I didn't have to run it by somebody else. And we're always thinking that the grass is going to be greener somewhere else. You know, if I only had this, if I only had that partner, if I didn't have this. And the problem that we have is that we're not content with where God has placed us. We're always thinking of something different, something more. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 7, right in the middle of a whole chapter about marriage, Paul's answering some questions about marriage that this church in Corinth is asking. It is not an exhaustive talk about marriage. He's answering some pretty specific questions about should we get married, should we not get married, is it okay to divorce? And we've talked a little bit about that. But right in the middle of it, he gives a little bit of a paragraph, a little bit of a talk, if you might say, about something that has nothing to do with marriage, but it has everything to do with marriage. He's going to talk about being content with where you're at, being happy in the stage of life and where you're at altogether. And here's my definition of contentment. My definition of contentment is to be content where you are, who you're with, and what you're doing. Just be content. God may bring changes into your life. That's not your call. We need, and I love what Paul says later on in Philippians chapter 4, to learn to be content. So again, the paragraph that we're going to read in 1 Corinthians chapter 7 doesn't even mention marriage, doesn't even mention family. But what I am going to do is I'm going to make some application about this whole thought of contentment to three areas. We're going to talk about society, we're going to talk about the family, and we're just going to talk about our personal life. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7, we're going to begin in verse 17. He says, "But as God hath distributed to every man, as the Lord hath called every one, so let him walk. And so ordain I in all the churches. Is any man called being circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Is any called in uncircumcision? Let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, but the keeping of the commandments of God. Let every man abide in the same calling wherein he was called. Art thou called being a servant or a slave? Care not for it, but if thou mayest be made free, use it rather. For he that is called in the Lord, being a servant, is the Lord's free man. Likewise also he that is called being free is Christ's servant. You're bought with a price. Be not ye the servants of men. Brethren, let every man wherein he is called therein abide with God." 3 times in this paragraph, all the way back in verse 17 and then in verse 20 and then in verse 24, he says, when you got saved, when God called you, when God brought you into his family, and you were in this circumstance, you were slaves, you were circumcised, you were uncircumcised, whatever it is, stay there. Don't try to jump ship. Don't try to be something that you're not. Just be content with where you're at. He's dealing with 2 issues here. You notice he didn't even talk about marriage. And I really honestly, that was just weird to me as I'm going through this series about marriage, and I got this paragraph, and now I'm not even going to talk about marriage, am I? I am, because he's using this as an illustration. He's saying even if in circumcision or uncircumcision, whichever situation you find yourself in, don't change things. Don't make major changes. And then he deals with another issue about slavery. Don't seek to be free. Don't seek to be a slave. Just stay where you're at. And here's the admonition for all of us. You know what? We just need to learn to be content. There's a difference between satisfaction and contentment. Satisfaction means I got what I wanted. I'm satisfied. I got what I wanted. Contentment means I'm happy, even though I didn't get it. Satisfaction has to do with working. It has to do with getting something. It has to do with finding that thing that we're looking for. It's more of an outward expression. Contentment is in my heart. Contentment means, you know what, I don't have it, but you know what, I'm still happy with it. And we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But what I want to do is I want to take this whole principle and kind of look at it in three phases. So the first phase I want to look at is kind of social. And the reason why I do that is because actually right here in this passage, he talks about something that is very evil. He talks about slavery. One of the criticisms against Christianity and against the Bible itself is that the Bible doesn't come out against slavery. It actually talks about it. It talks about how to be a good slave. And we live in a society where slavery has been very, very evil in our history. How can the Bible be so I guess at least nonchalant about something so evil as one person owning another person? And the reason being is because the Bible is not so much geared to change society. It is geared to change people. Paul doesn't talk about the whole slavery issue. Paul doesn't talk about some of the moral evils of the society. He doesn't talk about against the Roman government. You know what he talks about? You need to change your life. Sometimes as Christians we have, this is where I need to be careful, but sometimes we are so concerned about the social evils in our world that we want to somehow change our world. We want to change the big picture. We want to abolish abortion. We want to stop all these evil things that are happening in our world. So you know what we do? We have to get the right person elected. We have to make sure that the wrong person isn't elected. We have to protest. We have to boycott. We have to do all these things because of the social evils that are in our world. We need to change the world. The apostles changed the world, but they didn't do it through those means. The early Christians changed the world by changing one soul at a time. See, because what if we did get rid of all the evil? What if we did, and you name whatever issue you want to stop or start or whatever it is. That's just a temporary fix. The only thing that is going to permanently change the course of the world is changing the people of the world. And that only comes through people receiving Jesus Christ as their personal Savior. If Christians spent half the time talking to people about their soul as they do trying to change the political climate, we would change the world. God has called us to do evangelism as a church. God has not called us to change society, although when we change people's lives because of Jesus, that's going to change society. And we change the world one soul at a time. As people trust Jesus Christ, and that's why the goal of our church is not to do anything in the community as far as changing society. It is to help people come into a right relationship with God through Jesus Christ, his Son. Paul didn't talk about slavery. He talked about, hey, if you're a slave, be a good one. If you're not a slave, be kind to anybody that is your slave. In other words, wherever you're at, be the best Christian you can be in that circumstance. And he did say, hey, if you have an opportunity to be free, go for it. If you have an opportunity to free your slaves, go for it. But you know what? Christianity's job isn't to change society, to change the world. It is to change people. Now, the second principle that I want to look at here just a little bit is on the family. The family. Because this is the context. This is talking about the family. And here's what I've discovered is we have a tendency in our family is to wish we had it different. When I'm single, I wish I were married. And I look forward to that time when I am married. And now when I get married, I want to have kids. And I want to have children. And I can't wait till those children grow up and they can get into school and become teenagers. And I can talk to them and reason with them. And then I can't wait until they get out of the house and they get married. And I don't have to worry about where they're at night. And I don't have to stay up until 1 and 2 until they come home. And I can't wait until they get out of the house and they're on their own. I can't wait for that empty nest syndrome. And now that they're out of the house and it's quiet and all we have to do is worry about what we're going to eat for dinner and watch Wheel of Fortune and Jeopardy at 7 o'clock and 7:30 at night on television. Man, I wish the kids would bring the grandkids over so we could play, so we could mess up the house, and it's okay. And have you noticed that we look at family that's a little bit different and say, I can't wait until it's like that. I remember when the kids were little, I couldn't wait till they got out of diapers. And then you just here is my thought, and I think I've got it from here because Paul talks about being content. Just be content. If you're single, enjoy it. Enjoy it. Every family dynamic has some good, and I won't say bad, but has some misgivings with it. Take what you have right now and live in that moment. Because once that moment is gone, you really can't get it back again. Once the kids are out of the house, well, except for grandkids, yeah, okay? Some of you are grandparents raising grandkids. I understand that whole deal. But once it's gone, it's gone. And those of you that are in the younger stages, when you've got preschoolers and they're running around and the house is never clean, and you're lucky to paint your fingernails, let alone your toenails, or not the guys probably, but all this stuff is going on in your life, and you say, man, I wish I just had 5 minutes of me time, blah, 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 blah. You know what? One of these days, you are going to have plenty of me time. Because one of these days, it very well may be just you by yourself with me time all over. And you'll wish you could just go back and just live one more day. I wish that God would allow us to be, maybe that's what heaven's going to be like, where we could transport ourselves to different places in our time. Because aren't there times when you have kids that you wish you didn't have kids? I mean, moments. And there's times when you don't have kids that you wish you had them. And if you could just kind of go and get it over with, say, whew, good. Okay, I got a little bit of free time, I can go back. But most of the time, we're in the middle of that thing. And so be very careful. Live in the moment. Enjoy. Someday, you're going to be married, probably. 5% of the American public is never married. And some of you are single right now, and you may. And someday you may be married. But right now, you're single. We're going to talk about this next week. If you have somebody that is single, get them here next week because we're going to talk about the advantages of being single. And there are many of them. As a matter of fact, Paul encourages people to remain single. We live in a society where if you're single, you're kind of like not in the norm. You're kind of on the outside, and everything is geared toward married people and geared toward couples. Yeah, we've got some couples that are getting ready to be engaged. They're engaged, getting ready to be married. So come, but I'm not trying to discourage you about getting married. Okay, I'm really not. But the problem is sometimes people that are single feel like they're a left wheel, feel like they're left out of everything. And no, there are some extreme advantages to being that. And so if you are, someday you're going to be married, but you know what? And someday, those of you that are married, someday you're going to be by yourself. Judy and I have figured out, I don't know if anybody else has talked about this, but we hope that when we go at the same time, Because I don't want to be by myself. And I told this, some of you know Howard Bishop. And I told Howard Bishop this. And I said, I don't want to be by myself, but I sure don't want my wife to be by herself. And Howard says, don't worry, Greg. When you're gone, she won't be by herself. She'll find somebody just like that. And I go, thanks a lot, Howard. You heard the story about the husband and wife were talking about, one of them's going to pass away. And the wife said, well, honey, I want you to know that when I pass away, I hope you'll get married again because you need somebody. You need to find somebody and get married. He said, oh, well, honey, no, I'm okay, but okay. And then she began to think about it. And she said, well, if you get married again, will you let her drive my car? He said, probably, yeah. Probably let her drive the car. Well, will she live in our house? Yeah, she'll live in our house. Will she sleep in our bed? Well, honey, we'll be married, yeah. She'll sleep in our bed. Will she use my golf clubs? No. She'll never use your golf clubs. Why not? She's left-handed. Uh-oh. Some people won't be single. But when we don't have kids, we want kids. When we have kids, we wish they were gone. You know what? Just enjoy the moment that you have right now. You don't have tomorrow. You can't go back to yesterday. Just grab everything you can and live today, in today. Do that. Now, the third is I want to just talk about just the whole thing about being content. About being content. And the problem is we think that happiness is somewhere there or it's some other environment. If I just had this kind of a job, if I didn't have this kind of health, if I had a different place, if I lived here, in other words, it's like we think that I will be happier if my life was a little bit different. But here's what I've discovered. If you are not happy with your life right now, adding something or taking it away will not change it because contentment is in your heart. You can be anywhere you want, and if you are content, that's where it's at. And that's why the Apostle Paul I'm going to just go and turn there, Philippians chapter 4. Let me read it to you because I've got it. Philippians chapter 4 and verse 11. Not that I speak in respect of want, for I have learned in whatsoever state I am, therewith to be content. I know both how to be abased and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I am instructed both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ, which strengtheneth me. If I have a lot, I'm okay. If I don't have anything, I'm okay. Does it sound like for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health? Sounds similar to that. No matter where I'm at, no matter what I have, you know what? I can be content. Because the heart of the problem is the problem in the heart. It's my heart. My heart needs to be content. And here's the problem is unless you have Jesus in your life, you probably won't be content. And here's my kind of last definition of contentment. You don't have it in your notes, and that is this. Contentment is realizing that God has provided everything you need in Jesus for your present happiness. It is to say, you know what? I've got Jesus. You know what? I'm okay. I don't need anyone else. I don't need to get rid of anybody. I don't need a different job. I don't need more money. I don't need less things. I don't need better health. I don't need worse health. I don't need anything to be happy. You know what? When I have Jesus, I trust him. And to me, that's where this contentment comes in, is I need to just trust that what God has placed for me for today in my life right now, I'm okay with it. Now, I struggle with that, and that's why I think, listen, that's when Paul in Philippians chapter 4, he says, I have learned to be content. That is the advantage, young people, that is the advantage of being old, is we have learned some things. And it doesn't matter if you're old, or if you're older, or, to some of these people, 20 is old. Hopefully, life, you have learned some things. And one of the things that we learn is, you know what? I just need to be happy with what I have. Because grabbing stuff doesn't make me happy. You see these people that are athletes and they win the Super Bowl or they win the World Series and it just didn't fill them up. It just didn't do anything for them. They achieved, they were satisfied, they got what they wanted, but evidently it's not what they needed. And when you have Jesus, you have everything. If you've never trusted Jesus Christ as your personal Savior, I am not going to tell you that that's going to solve all your problems. It will not. And it will not automatically make you content. It will definitely not. There are a lot of us that are Christians that we're still acting like if I just had some more of this and started doing this and getting involved, that it would make me happier. And you know what? Happiness is not out there. Happiness is in here. But I will say this, the more those of us that are Christians seek to develop our relationship with Jesus and recognize that, you know what? He's taking good care of me. And I'm content. I'm content with Jesus. That'll help you out. But I will say this, eternity is a long time not to make the right decision with Jesus. Jesus came and died on a cross to not only help us in this life, but to help us in forever. And if you've never trusted Jesus Christ as your Savior, I would love for you to surrender your life to Him. Trust Him as your own personal Lord and Savior. Contentment. It's not something that comes natural. It's something that we always want a little bit more and a little bit more. And it's not laziness. We need to be careful of that. Some people, they're content, but it's really they're lazy. Contentment doesn't mean that I'm not striving to become a better person. I'm not striving to better my life. It just means, you know what? With what God has given me, I'm content, and I'm going to make the best I can out of what God has given me. Let's bow our heads in prayer. Heads bowed, eyes closed. I just want to